Thanks for joining us, Chad. I'm really looking forward to hearing your talk. It's been a while since I've heard one of your talks. I guess probably last time was at Hack Fort Worth sometime last year or so.
Yeah, back when the world was open and functioning. It was great times.
We didn't realize how good we had it, because I remember last year at DerbyCon thinking, what are we going to do about DerbyCon? This is the last one. What are we going to do next year? And that was the least of the worries. We didn't get to go to any conferences hardly. So
Yeah, it's this whole thing started off with all the virtual conferences, and even people now are starting to slow down on those. So, can everybody see my screen?
yes.
Okay. And all right, I think we're good to go. Okay, so I titled this, "What Do You Mean We've Been Hacked? A Casual Stroll Through the DFIR Dumpster Fire," which is more to say the process of, because it can be very interesting at times. So, who am I? I'm Chad. I work for a consulting firm called Protivity. I've been doing IT and security for a little over 10 years. My previous job, I developed an incident response environment that was certified by the NSA, specifically the NSCAP program, to be resilient and secure. I've worked with everything from Fortune 50 companies to little bitty, basically nonprofit, close to startups. Have a few SAN certs, a couple of degrees, all work paid for, by God, thank you. Every now and then you get lucky enough to work for a company that will train you, basically, and I've been lucky enough. So what we're going to do tonight, as I said earlier, for anybody that heard it, was we're going to do a tabletop exercise, for lack of a better description. We're just going to walk through, I'm going to present some information, and we can interactively talk and discuss how to work through this. What do you see? What do you think? What would you do? What would your organization do, if that's how you want to look at it? So I hope it's fun, entertaining, and it goes by quick, but not too quick. So we're going to talk about Thingymabits LLC. And Thingymabits LLC is a manufacturing company that's based here in North Texas, and they were hit by a ransomware attack this last weekend, and now they are shut down. They want us to focus on root cause while their IT team focuses on restoration. I've never actually had that happen in real life. Like I said, I made this, easy to present, so I'm just going to gloss over quite a few things that happen in real life. And then we've had a couple of meetings to get some details, but really all we got were some questions answered about their environment. It's a mostly Windows environment. Email is, so ignore that email is Microsoft Office 365 part. Damn it. All on-prem, no cloud virtualization. They have 12 servers. 50% of them are virtualized using Hyper-V. There's 80 endpoints that are all upgraded to Windows 10. MFA for VPN is enabled. There is no SIEM. The network architecture can best be described as flat. This is not to be considered gospel. Trust but verify. That's a pretty common saying in my neck of the woods. I'm sure it is your guys as well. So this infection was 10 servers, 16 endpoints, and it was the Conti variant of ransomware. And we know this because the client gave us a copy of the note. This is a genuine note. I redacted the identifying information, but this was actually from a gig we were working just a couple weeks ago. So many questions. What do we investigate? What do we ask the client? Trust but verify, like I said. So at this point, I want to ask, what would you want to know from here? We already know the basics. We have a little bit of information about what was infected. So what are some of the first questions you guys would ask?
What type of backups do you have?
Very good. So for this, let's try to go with restoration is IT's job. So backups can come in handy for certain things like hoping maybe you caught previous versions of the infection or of the programs they were using. You're trying to find the infection. If you're just thinking about restoration, IT teams don't work out with that. In the real world, absolutely. What's your backup solution? That's my number one question. So I like it. And I cannot see the chat anymore. So if anybody's posting stuff in chat, I'm sorry.
Was the email their first indication of compromise, or what was the first indication of compromise?
Yes. Very good question. Very good question. Okay, so we would probably start off with let me get back over here. We're going to question everything, even why. So some of the questions I would go about asking in the specific scenario is what network security technologies are in use. So basically, where can I get some information? Do you have firewall logs? Do you have an inventory of your assets?
No.
Always no. Or actually, wait till you see my answer. Do you have a network map? And how many external facing accessible from the web systems do you have? Have you had any penetration testing done previously? Any vulnerability scans? So client comes back and says, we use Symantec AV. We have a firewall with IDS, IPS, and VPN. They have 1 year of firewall logs, they tell us. Do you have an inventory of your assets? Not sure how up to date it is, but I'll look it over and send it to you. Same with the network map. How many external facing systems do you have? 1, an FTP server we use to receive orders from clients. Websites hosted by a third party. I automatically go, oh, an FTP server, joy. Have you had any penetration testing done? No, they sure haven't. Do any questions pop up in your guys' head after hearing or seeing those? So we would get a system inventory. We see that they had 12 servers. They got 2 DCs, 2 Exchange servers. One's virtualized, physical file server, a production server. They got their hypervisor. Then they have virtualized Symantec, FTP, Exchange, Dev, File, and Shipping. Okay. So what's interesting about these, do you guys notice anything that pops up in your head right away?
Well, you said it's basically flat. The accessible FTP server to receive orders is on the same network as everything else.
Yes.
No DMZ.
No.
Yep.
And it's server 2008 R2.
Mm-hmm.
So we start seeing those and we're like, oh, this is not good. So our endpoints, DHCP assigned IP addresses, IP range is there. Systems are on automatic updates, Symantec AV, pretty basic. Network map, very basic. Did this myself. I'm not a networking guru, so please forgive any atrocities you may see. I was just trying to get the point across. It's very basic. So with all this in mind, where do we start? So what are some good sources of information that you guys have noticed so far? Or where would maybe be the first place you would try to go and look?
You said a year's worth of firewall logs that may tell us whether that FTP server was actually a point of compromise. And if you don't see anything there, maybe it was a phishing attempt or
Yeah,
something.
perfect. I was thinking like semantic server. I did say the firewall logs, domain controllers, and FTP server, all great areas of information. So we need to inform ourselves and get a plan together. What systems are encrypted and what systems were not and why. So we noticed right away Symantec was not encrypted. Secondary domain, my descriptions got off. I apologize, guys. Ignore the descriptions for the most part. Symantec was not encrypted and Hyper-V 01 wasn't encrypted, which seems weird, but And then we only had 16 endpoints encrypted because they were desktops that were left powered on. So office systems or something of the side, like. So we asked the client, well, how come Symantec wasn't encrypted? Can you tell us about that? And they say, oh, our inventory is wrong. We actually had that migrated to a Linux system last year when we did some upgrades. I guess our inventory wasn't updated. Haha, okay. What about Hyper-V 01? They said, oh, upgraded the hardware last year. We migrated the VMs over and decided to go to Hyper-V Server 2019 because it's free. We never got around to joining the server itself to the domain and local logins to manage the server. Inventory wasn't updated, I guess. Oh, okay. So basically, Symantec is Linux and Hyper-V wasn't on the network. It may have had an IP. It may have been pingable, but it was just one local account to manage the server, apparently. So, interesting. Everything else is encrypted.
At that point, you ask them if they even changed the passwords?
What was that?
Did you even ask them if they changed the passwords at that point?
Oh, well, so in real life, yes, we did. That was always first thing is if you have been ransomed, you need to rotate passwords, change your Kerberos ticket, granting ticket, whatever thing, and do it twice. And there's all sorts of real steps that go into it. So great question. I kind of, once again, like I said, glazed over a few things just because I was trying to make this easy to present, but that is always a very first step, very first question is, have you even changed your passwords? So good question. Step 2 is let's gather evidence. Now that we know what's been infected and when, let's take images and gather forensic artifacts. It could take a bit. So what else can we work on? We're going to investigate, and we're going to start with what's useful and immediately available. We know that Symantec wasn't encrypted. So between that not being encrypted and having access to the console and get the email alerts that went out when things started to go down, we know that they started receiving alerts at these times on these systems. So now we have a timeline, if you will. The tells us when systems were compromised, what order, and it tells us when it began. So at least now we have a starting point to work backwards from. We call this the bang, and now we work backwards from the bang, if you will. Different viewpoint is, let's go by time. So now we see the order that the systems were encrypted. What are your thoughts on why the infection spread the way it did? If you look at the times, maybe something stands out to you. And because of that, can you tell if the malware spread automatically or manually by looking at that?
I mean, if it hit, I'm guessing if it hit those last 3 at exactly the same moment, then it was automated.
Yeah.
Would the speed of the time, I mean, because you're looking at like 6:34, 14, and 25. I mean, that's, I guess somebody could be manually that fast, but would that, just because of the speed it did it, would that lean more toward automatic versus manual?
Yeah. So what's confusing about this is those last three, right?
Mhm.
Like those three were hit at the same time and they were hit minutes later. Like that seems weird. What's going on?
Well, and that
Maybe it was.
they're not sequential 10, 20, 41. So it's as if the data was collected
Mhm.
previously.
So maybe it was both automated and manual in a way. Attackers love to use text lists that they feed into their tools. So they will use certain tools, and I'll get there in a second, to make a network list, a target list, if you will, save it into a flat text file, feed that as their input. So maybe some of the systems were hit automatically and others were hit manually. It's one way to look at this.
Would you say that this might be evidence that the FTP server was not the initial point of infection and that it was not the first to be encrypted?
At this point, I would say, that FTP server was encrypted right in the middle of things.
Mhm.
But I would also lean on my personally experience in knowing that typically the system that is breached is not normally the system that they do all their stuff off of. They typically pivot in a little bit, they get off that one, and they try to burrow in a little bit normally. So
Okay.
when looking at this, I kind of think, man, it looks like it's kind of random, but then you got those three that look like they were targeted. And then I look at what they are. It's a DC, an Exchange server, and a dev server. So what about the endpoints? Semantic alerts for all 16 endpoints came in between 6:34 and 6:40 UTC once again. Does this change anything? And not really. No, endpoints were probably just collateral damage. We're going to image and examine them anyway because you always have phishing and things like that.
Well, from the
that
UTC timestamp, but they're coming from multiple days, from 12/12 to 12/27.
that's an Excel error. I don't know how I
Okay.
missed that.
Okay.
I filled down and meant to edit the time. God, good catch, Waterfall. Man, so much for my Q&A team out there watching Christmas movies. Anyways,
you mean Die Hard?
yeah, that's the best Christmas movie. That and Home Alone, but that's either here or there. So I don't think it changes anything, but at this point, I'm like, oh man, that FTP server's still right there at the top of my list. That's what I'm really banking on, just because it's really hard to be non-biased when you're doing this. You see that kind of stupid stuff. But we still need to do due diligence. You need to examine those endpoints. You need to look at phishing and all the different possibilities, right? It's part of the job is making sure you're doing due diligence. So step 3 is we're going to investigate. And really, this is where we spend most of our time here. After imaging and collecting artifacts from systems to do our investigation, we're going to do the high-level look at a few of them to gather some basic IOCs. Your types of IOCs are going to be registry entries, program execution, link files, and document opening and closing. In a case like this, it wouldn't be USB, but maybe if you're looking at insider theft, it would be, just different things, serial numbers, whatever. So we tend to look for them by looking at activity around the time that we know something malicious was going on. So in this case, we know when Symantec started sending alerts, so we know to look around then. We're going to look at logins, especially RDP. We're going to look at program execution. And then on the FTP server, of course, you would look at incoming collections. You'd want to look at the logs. You would want to do all this type of stuff, right? So what did we find doing just a quick little high level over the servers? We found some remote desktop connections, and we found the account that they used to spread the infection. So we see that the administrator account was used. This is the domain administrator account, not a local administrator account. And we see the source of the logins and how the infection spread. So when you start looking at that, you see the first infections came from a connection of devserv01, and then it moved from file 01 down the list until you hit DC01 and Exchange 01, where you see that devserv01 is the source of both of those at 640, and devserv01 itself did not have any RDP connections. And now you're like, what the hell is going on? Because that's what I would have been like, you know, whatever. That's the type of information you look at, you go, okay, so now the FTP is looking less suspicious, but still a prime candidate. But now I need to check out why devserv01 is different. So we're trying to make an IOC list. We probably don't want to put IP addresses, internal ones anyways. We probably don't want to use internal account names or system names because it just gets really noisy when you're trying to do an IOC scan. So is there anything that's really unique about this? No, but it does give us a lot of information. But we want to know what is interesting about devserv01. So investigating devserv01, we come up with a few things. We see that the encryption program was called mstscc.exe, but it looks like it had the same hash as another program that was in a different file called 1.exe. We see where they tried to run 1.exe first and it didn't work, or Symantec caught it, I should say, and they figured out how to disable Symantec because they had administrator credentials, which, by the way, yeah, so VSDS is the kickoff that actually encrypted the system. We see that they used ps.exec on the system, and it looked like there was some evil PowerShell scripts that were run, and they used advanced IP scanner. And I'm thinking, okay, so we have two different encryption programs run at different times, but they have the same hash, by the way. Or we have ps.exec being run, we have advanced IP scanner. It's like, this was their staging. This is where they were doing the heavy lifting out of. So these are very basic IOCs, once again, mostly just because we're doing a presentation, but also because this is kind of how you start finding those threads you want to pull on across all the systems. So what do we do with these? How do you go about searching all these things? Well, if you're in an environment like this one that doesn't, I mean, you have the Symantec console, but you can't really trust it. It's already been disabled by the ransomware software because they have the proper creds. So what do you do to search your IOCs? Myself, I used PowerShell and I wrote a script. And so I normally keep my cases in a file like this, or, you know, so a folder structure and different artifacts. And inside of all these artifacts, by the way, you guys can see the folder I have open, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So you have browsing history, you have registry information, you have file system, whatever. So I do a lot of this using CAPE. I do some using browsing history view. I do log to timeline, things like that. So, but I keep everything in this folder structure because I wrote a PowerShell script that is kind of based on this folder structure, but can be easily modified. And to show you guys what happens, I have a test here. So we have cases, test, and inside a test, we have all the data And we have the system and then all the artifacts. So that would mimic, you know, all those different artifacts. And then everything inside of there is either a CSV, a text, or an Excel file. So what I like to do is from the root of that is I can open up a PowerShell window. Let me move that over here. And I can run my own that I wrote. Search Pro IOC module. We want to set the target folder of where we're at and then data. Our working folder is where we're at. And our IOC list is right there in IOC.text. I hit enter on that. It runs for a little bit. It does some stuff, and what it opens up is this. All my CSV hits, all my Excel hits, all my text hits. So what it is hitting on is the data looks like this, and my IOC list looks like this. This is a test, this should work, looking for these values, whatever. So there's other things in there, but that's not what shows up as a hit. If you look at what hits, it is just this. So what it tells us is the system folder, the IOC that it hit on, the file name that it hit on, and the location in that file where the hit is. And most of these, I didn't do it in Excel because there's a lot of data in the Excel, but text, it'll give you a preview of the line as well as CSV. So without going to that other document, this document, I can just look and see, is this match something I actually want to go hunt down, or is it, you know, a false positive? So that's how I start finding threads to pull on personally. So after I do that, we're going to investigate. What we found out was that most of the systems, including the endpoints, fit the same pattern. That pattern would be that the infection looks to spread mostly automatically. The ones that stand out are DevServ01, DC01, and Exchange01. The reason they stand out was that because they all were infected at the same time, whereas they weren't infected in a random order, and that DevServ01 did not have those RDP connections coming into it. So how were they on there? Why those three systems? So before I get into this, does anybody want to venture a guess as to why the domain controller, the Exchange server, and the dev server were left for last?
If it had to do with domain credentials, if they were not available, the domain controller, things may not have worked.
Yeah,
Potentially.
exactly. When people can't log in and email stops working, people notice. That doesn't explain DevServ01. So DevServ01 at this point, we were really interested in FTP. It is being investigated or has been investigated. But really at this point, let's find out why DevServ01 is the stomping ground, why it's the staging server, and what was going on there.
Is that where they got in, and then since it was one of the last ones, they didn't want to lock them, they didn't want to encrypt it and knock themselves out?
See, you ask great questions like that, and you're going to get great answers here in just a few slides. So what we see is DevServ03 had some RDP logs. What do you see interesting about those?
The 01 and 02, there's a secondary 02, but
Oh God, it's all supposed to be 01. Once again, I didn't do a good job fact checking my Excel tables. Ignore the number. It's all the same server.
Okay.
My bad. I will need to fix all these things before I post it. Look at that RDP source address.
Yeah.
Same IP. Yeah.
It's an extra.
So that is a real life Amazon Web Services VPS address. I don't know if it's active. I just went and picked a number out of the AWS VPS range. So please don't do anything to that. I don't know if it belongs to anybody. It just shows to belong to Amazon. So, but that is a virtual private server range. And now we're thinking, wait a second, this is DevServe. That's an external IP. That's extremely suspicious. But now we also have a new account, dev admin, dev_admin. And then we see the initial breach time is 12/3. Our infection didn't start till 12/12. We see a connection on 12/3, a connection on 12/10, and then another connection on 12/10 by the administrator account.
So they got in, create the ID, and then got out or set dormant and then came back later.
So a big thing about most ransomware campaigns is it is usually a week to week and a half, depending on the campaign, between initial breach and activity, because it's just like an office job. Oh, hey, here's a stack of breached systems to work through, deploy ransomware, try to go make some money today. And they are literally working down a list of available systems. And when they get to you, they get to you. So about a week, 10 days is not unheard of to see between initial breach and first signs of actual nefarious activity. So yeah, they got in, they hung around for a little bit, they came back, and then all of a sudden they came back as administrator. So what questions do we have now? What's the first question you guys have? How about, what's the dev admin account? Client says, it's an admin account on the DevServe 01 system. Okay, thanks for the information.
Yeah. Well, given that though, as well, that's not a, it's not like administrator or just a normal system account. So that would make me suspicious of, that it's a known entity or insiders or something, because that's not something you would normally access, dev_admin. That's not something I'm trying to brute force.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'd be curious if he just said that because it was on that server and it's like, oh, well, it's a, dev admin, or did somebody actually create? I mean, is that something that they had used before or had been using or had created, or was that created by somebody else and they just the ID and they accepted it and went on?
I love your guys' train of thoughts. That is, I don't really address that, but those are great questions in the middle of a breach. Like, this seems to be a weird name. Really, I just made the name because it's easy to relate to the dev system. So for this particular instance, don't infer too much out of it, but absolute fantastic train of thoughts, and that's how it is in real life. So why are there RDP connections from external IP addresses? Client says, I don't know. Well, there's only one reason. The system's available from the internet. Are the connections expected, we ask them? Client says, well, it wasn't us. That's just awesome. Glad you guys know your environment so well.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because that's what they responded initially with, was right. Just the FTP server was available from the internet.
Yep.
They had no idea. Yeah.
Exactly. Remember those firewall logs? Because they'd come in real handy right now. we have 1 year's worth of firewall logs. Well, you have inbound, but not outbound, so we can't see what was going back out. So, sure, we'll go through the firewall logs, and what do we find? Same stuff we already saw. So now we're like, okay, but now we want to start seeing everything to that server. So my initial attempt to create or mimic a bunch of firewall logs failed. So basically the whole point of this is we start seeing incoming traffic on a couple of those dates from firewall logs. And it basically lets us know, hey, yes, they hit the dev server, and it looks like that's how they got in. And it was such a prime spot with such little activity that they felt like they could stay hidden there. So what we have now is we're pushing the time frame back. We're looking at suspected initial breach date of December 3rd. Firewall logs confirmed that they didn't get in again from that address till later on the 10th. So the first RDP was initial access. The second RDP was verifying access and credential harvesting. And the third RP was verifying that their credentials worked. So when they came back that second time as dev admin, they ran Mimikatz or whatever they wanted, or used PowerShell fucking natively and dumped the creds, and they got the administrator account because it had been used to log on to that system. So now they have domain admin creds. So now what you're wondering is, man, what happened between compromise and infection? We want to check a few things. We're going to check the dev server system for anomalous activity. We want to look at places that are usually a deep dive, like the MFT and the journal, to see what files were added, modified, and deleted. We want to check, did the dev admin log on to any other systems? We do that using that IOC scan. No, did not. Did the external IP address show up in any other systems or firewall logs? No, it did not. What anomalous activity does devserv01 have during this time frame? So, using all our investigative techniques and all our data, we see that on December 11, 2020, a program named jaways.exe was copied to the Java program inside program files folder and set to run every 6 hours. By the way, this is a real life IOC I am giving you. On December 12th, at just after midnight, so right before that, we find out that pCloud, the cloud file sharing service, was created on the file system and then executed. It was uninstalled later that day. It was mapped to the P drive locally on the system. And even though it was uninstalled, there was an SQLite database left behind after the uninstall. So at this point, we've updated our IOC file. We run the scan. We look at everything across our systems. And as you can see in the IOC list, we've added the external IP address, the dev admin account, because it should not be on any other system. We added the Java VS and the pCloud. So now we're going to have some data exfil is what it looks like. You had a cloud drive that was mapped locally to a system. We know that bad things have been going on. So the first program, Java VS, shows under file properties, if you were to right click the file and go to properties, to be mstscc.exe and licensed to Microsoft. Does anybody know what's wrong with that? One too many C's. So you run that. mstsc is the RDP program. If you take the hash of the RDP program and you match it against what the hash of this file was, they don't match. So it's a pretend Java file pretending to be RDP. And when we, excuse me, when we did reverse engineering on it, it matched, or when we saw what it did and we took the hash and we scanned for it, we found out that it was a program called ngrok. And ngrok is a legit program. You can Google it. It's ngrok. It creates a reverse shell from a system behind a firewall. So that is why there wasn't an RDP connection for DevServ01 after 12.10, because they started doing everything through reverse shell straight through the firewall. The SQLite database recovered from pcloud folder gives us lots of juicy details. The pcloud account was registered to badevilhacksource@gmail, and it listed the files copied to the P drive and synced to the cloud provider. Oh, so now we know what they took. It's not a data breach, it's a surprise backup. They took a folder called finance.7z, hr.7z, and schematics.7z. They did what we like to call the zip and ship, straight out the door. Finance and HR, well, if you guys remember, let me pull it back up actually. Back on our system inventory, the restricted use file 02, that was, I don't think I called this out earlier, that was restricted to HR and to finance data users. The prod server is what has schematics on it. So that leads us to believe that, where to go? Schematics came off the production server and finance and HR came off that restricted use file 02 server. So, okay, they had access from the dev server using the administrator accounts on a flat network to all the file shares. And even though the restricted file 02 was supposed to be just for finance and HR, of course the domain administrator had rights on it. Domain administrator can do anything they want if you don't follow proper procedure. So, all out the door. Like, great. That's pretty much the end of the investigation right there. So now we know, in conclusion, that they came in on the dev server. Oh, by the way, all the things that we look through end up supporting this. We can't necessarily say with 100% accuracy, but what we can say is that there is no evidence to disprove the theory that they came in on the dev server because it was unknowingly exposed via RDP on the internet. And that was done because turns out some dev from 3 years ago or whatever the story may be wanted to work from home. You know, any number of insert stupid story here. Only thing to do from here really is present those findings, write that report, because that's everybody's favorite job, writing those reports. But what we know is they came in, they over RDP, they did a credential scraping, got administrator credentials. They then turned around and established a remote reverse shell. They installed a cloud environment or cloud provider sync program. And then they use that to zip and exfil the most pertinent data for the company. So now this company is going to have to basically wait for the other shoe to drop. At this point, if they want to prevent release of all their data, they can pay the ransom. There's all sorts of information and risk and things that go along with that. Or what Thingamabits can do is not pay the ransom. Hopefully they can recover and all the data is going to be leaked, because that is what ransomware does now. There is always almost data exfil behind it, and there is always a ransom after it. I cannot tell you the last time we had a ransomware without data exfil involved. It's probably been 2.5, 3 years. So for a more interactive part, what would have helped, guys? What would you guys have done to, you know, some of you as attackers, maybe some of you as defenders, what would you have done in your environment to stop all this? And I know it's a laundry list of things, so maybe hit some of the big ones.
I'm somewhat biased here, but they said they'd never had even a vulnerability scan, let alone a pen test. Is that would have identified many of these weaknesses?
Yes, it would have.
Or at least have something notifying when IDs are created, or at least some kind of when something's out there. So at least there's some notification that this ID was created, or this ID was doing something, or something was installed, or whatever.
Some sort of central logging management, a SIEM they don't have.
Multi-factor authentication for any remote access.
Yeah. I mean, thing is they didn't think they had anything on the internet.
Right.
So VPN, sure, they had MFA for that. They didn't know they had something sitting outside the VPN.
A lot of issues were also not keeping up to date with the network, saying, yeah, I'll just get to it someday.
Yep. So many things went wrong, and it could have been probably so much worse, which we'll get to that too. So they could have started with following Microsoft's recommended least privilege administrative model. And I have a link here. But basically, domain admin can only log on to domain controllers, server admins only on servers, endpoints on endpoints, and local admins should ideally use different usernames and or passwords. Basically, a much better IAM program. Central logging and alerting. Use a SIEM, Splunk, Sysmon, anything. Anything is better than nothing. So many environments we go into, they never do any advanced logging. They don't turn on any kind of advanced logging at all. No centralized logging, nothing to go from. And we are literally pulling logs off of individual machines. And it is the biggest grind on an investigation, is having to investigate each machine individually. Segregated network architecture, anybody? I mean, different VLANs, ACWs, better firewall rules, anything, man. I mean, these people were basically a one-man IT shop, started them up 10 years ago or something. I don't know what was going on. A penetration test or vulnerability scan, including scanning the IP range for publicly accessible ports. That's where you were coming in, Wirefall. You're biased, but like it needs to be done. A better EDR program. Symantec, come on. I say Carbon Black and CrowdStrike because they're top two, but really, I mean, there's any number of Silence or whatever, I mean, there's any number that are better than Symantec out there. You might as well be running McAfee, and lots of places still are. And maybe if they would keep up to date with it and they would make sure to have the newest one or pay some extra money for all the widgets, cool, but they're not the best. And we see them fail time after time after time. So I want to know, especially from somebody like Philip or just anybody, Wirefall, like, what would you have done?
I'll leave that one to you, Phil.
I salute you.
How about turning that around, and what was Thingamabit's response? What did the first things they do?
Oh man, Thingamabit's got a long list of things to do. And so don't get me wrong. Also, while this is very strongly based on the last 3 or 4 of my responses, I definitely made this worse than any of them were. None of them were as bad as I made this seem. And a lot more work went into it than I made it seem like. It's more just kind of walking through the process. But we always do a recommendations section, and that section always includes things like you need to strengthen your IAM program. You need to do least privilege access. Nobody ever seems to do that. You need to and do advanced logging. Maybe even if you have a scene, you still don't have the advanced logging turned on that you need to get all the information. Things like, besides what we recommended, I mean, network segregation, all the basics. So we always put things like that into place, and or try to tell them like, these are things you definitely need to do. We, of course, being in a consulting firm, you always say we have a great IAM team that can come in, and that's true. We really do. We have a top-notch IAM team. Our Microsoft Azure SME, while he may be almost insufferable as a person, he is awesome at what he does, and that's because why he's so insufferable. He just, he can walk over and tell you something like it's second nature, and you're like, I've never done this before. Can you slow down a little bit? Those are things that they would do. What they would say about all their findings would be, okay, sounds like we need to invest in an MSSP. They may say we need to invest in better IT. They need to have a better cybersecurity budget, whatever. It depends on the size of the company.
That's what you would hope, right? I mean, what actually they do is submit a press release that they care about their customer security and they fire the CISO.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, well, if you guys don't want to tell me what kind of havoc you would wreak, let's be real. In this environment, you could have done anything and everything you wanted to do. There's no limit, it'd be a playground.
Well, we know Tinker would be accessing the webcams, so.
I'd give everyone the wallpaper of the pic that you just showed.
What was that?
I'd give everyone that wallpaper.
That might be Tinker right there, actually. I'm not sure. Never know what he looks like, right? Things I picked up along the way for doing investigations. Log the timeline and Plasto is invaluable for getting the big picture. And I mean that enthusiastically. Run it against an entire image if you can, mostly because it recovers the deleted event logs. It's easy to speed up. Use easy tools, Eric Zimmerman's tools, and you can get the MFT body file and combine them. And then you have a super timeline that also has MFT creation, deletion timestamps in it. I wish we could also get the journal information in there, but then it would just become too much. There's a link to get the most current releases. And then I have some things I use quite often: compare hash values of files to find a match to a hash of interest. Just some PowerShell, get the child item, recurse the folder you're in or whatever folder you want. Get the hash of that file in the SHA-1, MD5, SHA-256, whatever you want. And then where that object hash equals, insert the hash that you're looking for in the format you're looking for, and then tell it to select the path of the item that it finds the match to. And awesome. So say you have the hash of a file that it ran under a different file name every time. It was morphing or whatever. Its file name, so it's harder to track. Well, if you have the hash and the hash is the same over 2 or 3 samples, you can search over all of your output, and hopefully you have your AM cache somewhere that recorded the hash, and then you'll be able to tell what systems it was running. Get multiple hash values. This is more for reporting. So same thing, get your child item of a directory, include the files you want, recurse the directory, and then select the full name of the file when you get the file hash. And I'd like here it's MD5 and SHA-1. Maybe you want to do SHA-1, SHA-256, whatever the case may be. And then you want to select the file name, the path, and put it all out in the hash and put it all out to grid view. So it pops up a separate window that's easy to copy and paste into Excel or whatever, or you can output it to an Excel file. And then MS Windows Application Experience program logs will also show potential program execution. So on top of your prefetch files and other ways programs are run, there's a log here that'll help show you. Funny enough, application log is very bad about logging applications. Microsoft Windows Partition Diagnostic has USB information. So that is what I was saying about insider threat information. If you're looking for information on USB devices, then you're going to look in maybe there because all your setup INI files and stuff, they're really bad. Windows is really bad about tracking its internal identifiers for USBs versus the physical identifiers of USBs. So it's always hard to pinpoint out of 10 thumb drives what thumb drive is, what volume serial number to Windows. This log does a great job of logging physical serial number to volume ID. So it's a handy log. And with that, that's all I got.
Oh, thanks, Graham. Great talk. Anyone have any questions for Graham? I mean, Chad. Chad Graham, not Chad. Yeah, great presentation.
Hey, I can see the chat again. So let me see what questions we have. Let's see. Are they running on skeleton folders or just flat out down? I mean, do we have amount of time to get this in order? Yeah, no, they were down. Such a small environment. Solar winds. Old stuff. Domain. I'm in mount point on other systems. Internal hit. Be publicly exposed. Yep, that was it. Good job. All dev accounts have weak passwords. Yeah, so the idea behind how they were originally breached, by the way, in my head was password spraying. While I know dev underscore admin wouldn't be a normal account, I just, for ease of presenting and to make it stand out, I did it like that. So please don't take this all to be too literal, but yeah, don't expose RDP. So anyways, any questions, guys, or anything I can answer for you?
Anyone have any questions or comments?
I enjoyed the walkthrough. It was fun.
Is everybody awake?
Yeah, you
Tried
just
not
did,
to
you
make
did
it
a good
boring.
job of you did a good job of explaining it so people don't have questions.
You did, Chad.
There's just
honestly,
so much that goes in. Oh, sorry, Daniel, go ahead.
No, you were probably going to say what I was about to say, or close to it. Like, there's so much for someone like me who doesn't work in a Windows environment very often, but is now learning how to do that. There's so much that I just, I don't even know where to start asking questions, like how to get on top of domain admin and domain controllers and, exploiting that. And there's a lot to ask. There's a lot of information in that talk. And every 5 minutes, I was like, I'm really glad that this is recorded because I'm going to have to go back and rewatch this.
Yeah, definitely. And if same way for anybody, you have any questions later, on my content, I'll actually put it back at the front. Oh, well, no. Anyways, I'll just put it in here at CG security. But anyways, no, there was so much that I had to gloss over because it had to fit into, an hour, and it didn't need, if we had 4 hours and it was like a real tabletop, or 8 hours, or real advanced tabletops are like 2 days. We could really get into some details, but I kind of had to skip over the firewall logs. I kind of had to skip over email investigation. There's so many things that go into doing due diligence. I just kind of jumped straight to the point each time. So
I did have a question that popped up. I forgot. When you're doing the forensics, like you said, we're moving over to some analysis while forensics is going on. For live systems, are you doing, were you actually capturing memory, all of that, or are you just doing disk type forensics? Or
So we do try to capture memory. Sometimes that can, when systems, especially when systems are have active ransomware on them, it can be hard to get anything off of them or put anything on them for that matter. So we try to always capture memory when possible safely without encrypting a media or opening up a connection to another system that could all of a sudden be hit. There's different steps that go into it, but we are definitely trying to do memory, and it has come in handy quite a few times. Interesting story. Part of what this was based on is them encrypting stuff using pCloud. It's a real thing. We had a list of like 12 files that were uploaded, and because this was more drawn out, it was like over a week worth of them exfilling data. Well, they had backups happen twice a week, and on 2 of those backups, we were able to catch 7 of the 12 files that were exported, the 7 zips, and one of them was encrypted. And we were like, great. And we were able actually in memory to pull up, we were able to recover the commands, and we were able to unencrypt the file because it was just encrypted using 7-zip. And we're like, oh, sweet. I didn't do that. I don't know the details that went into it. We have somebody that is much more adept at doing that deep dive forensic stuff than I am. I'm more of a forensics as related to incident response. I need some quick answers, not spend a day, 2 days doing deep dive on one process. So, but we were able to unencrypt the zipped file and tell them what was in it, and it was bad. Somebody asked, did they pay the ransom? And I haven't had a client pay ransom in the last year or so. I think ransomware has finally been such a common thing that most places have gotten better about doing their backups. At least they have some sort of backup a month ago offline that they can recover from. They always choose to not pay the ransom. And the last 3 or 4 clients have had all the data that was exfilled released because they didn't pay the ransom. So that involves credit monitoring and everything that goes into all that, breach notices, etc.
Well, that defining of the initial compromise point is probably crucial then as far as backups go, is because you want the step 1 behind that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then what you have to worry about is, did they restore a bad backup?
Yeah.
And we've had that happen. You know, they think, oh, it happened on 12th, restore from the 9th. Well, you were breached on the 3rd, you know. So you restored a bad backup, essentially.
Yeah, I would think that would be a good thing is, well, and a good thing from the attacker perspective is get in and then wait long enough for backups to be run to where you know it would be sucked into the backup. So even though if they did catch you and did the restore, they're just restoring, you still keep your access.
Yeah, exactly. It's
That-
they restore your persistence for you.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, that brings up a conversation I really like to have, and I'd be interested in hearing everyone's viewpoint on, one of the requirements for PCI is that you have a yearly external penetration test, or what is it, quarterly, yearly, internal, whatever it is, or after any significant change of your network environment. Now, what signifies a significant change? Because my largest ever single compromise, legitimately as a pen tester, was tens of millions of records, name, social, date of birth, social security, address, everything, driver's license. There were a host of Oracle databases exposed to the internet, like 8 of them. Only one of them was compromised, and it had default accounts. So it's not like it was some sophisticated attack I was doing. It was freaking default accounts. pulled down all the data, and when the autopsy came in, when we were looking at why this happened, it was that one server had died, and they restored it from a backup. The backup had been done before the hardening. So is restoring from backup a significant network change? In this case, it definitely was. You know, but if that's a significant change, then you should be doing penetration tests to meet PCI after every single thing that happens. You know, I don't know. I like that conversation. I've heard some really interesting, you know, and people who definitely disagree with that as well. But
we actually had a client that had, and most have at some point, the bigger ones anyway, for sure. We had a client that did have a penetration test and a vulnerability scan and stuff done. And it wasn't, I'm not going to say attacker adversary style penetration test, but it wasn't just a vulnerability scan. They were two different products that they received. And penetration tests seemed to have been done well. It was well documented. We were happy with what we received. And it had been, I don't know, I want to say it was 9 months old when we started our investigation. And it was so helpful to be able to see how a penetration test was able to document and move through. And we, as incident response, were able to feed off of the pen test because we were able to know where the high risk parts were. And sure enough, the highest risk machine that called on the pen test hadn't been patched properly, and it was breached. And it was one of those RDP open on the internet type things.
nice. Yeah, that's one of my first targets, when mostly internal. You know, it does happen occasionally external where you can pivot, but on an internal is getting access to shares so that I can access prior pen test reports. So that I don't actually, I have to do the scans. They've done it for me.
I see Benjamin asked, have you ever seen a real attacker in this maintain persistence on Cisco hardware? I personally have not seen that, but I know somebody that has. Guy that's on our team, probably one of the smartest people I know. Maybe like Counter, maybe you were on when I've had my buddy Uriah come on Hack Fort Worth or 2600. I can't remember which one night a couple months ago, and he was showing us the T-Mobile honeypot and all that stuff, or whatever the name of it is. And he has some good stories about advanced persistence because he used to work for the government and do all sorts of crazy stuff. But he's seen some awesome or some weird Cisco persistence mechanisms and things like that. But it was all government related. So, of course, what he can say about it is, that's about all I can say about it.
One of my favorite things on any infrastructure devices, especially switches, routers, is if you have your access to it, is just you can log all the packets, and now you see all the clear text credentials going through. You know, you can maintain somewhat of a persistence there by just constantly capturing, even if they're changing passwords.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the things, and Microsoft actually provides it now. I had said earlier, when we go into an environment and it's breached, we ask them, have you changed your passwords yet? Yes or no, doesn't matter. Okay, did you change all of them, including the Kerberos ticket granting ticket, whatever it's called, KBR TGT or something? And they're like, what's that? So we basically provide them with documentation and a script from Microsoft itself that resets the password twice, because if you don't do it twice, then it's still able to be recovered. So we always have to do that. But then they're like, but then you're going to have, sometimes you have to rejoin domain systems and all sorts of things go into it. So it's not easy when this kind of stuff happens, especially when it comes to the passwords part of it.
Do many of your clients, I'm assuming it would probably very much depend on size, but have to actually go completely offline, you know, do third-party email communications, Slacks outside of the company because of the compromise?
Not a whole lot. So these days, most companies are Office 365. They change their passwords, they rotate the tickets, and then we won't necessarily trust that everything's fine. But what we will do is we will start doing some like basic status updates or whatever, just non-sensitive information. But we almost always maintain an out-of-band communication method. And typically it is something along the lines, it's not Slack. It's usually either texting directly or it's using, I'm going to go blank on it. There's another app, but it's another chat app, not Signal, but something else that we'll use to communicate with one or two points of contact. And then if we need to do like meetings or something, we'll send them a Teams link from our environment where they will just join it from their system, and talk to them that way. WhatsApp, thank you. Or is it WhatsApp? Yeah, actually, I think it was WhatsApp, but we haven't, since we've all migrated to Teams. That's typically what we do now, is we have their systems. We send them a Teams link from us, and they join it from their system, and that way unless they're actively monitoring their screen, they're probably not part of it. And we know who's joining.
So Chad, I got to go, but I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Anyone else? Any more questions? Well, if no one has any questions, I guess we will call it good for the night. Thanks again, Chad, for the awesome presentation.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.